Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Jad Boutros, and I am the CEO and co-founder of TerraTrue. And with me is my co-host, Anthony Prestia, VP of Privacy at TerraTrue. You'll hear from Anthony in just a minute as he starts the conversation topics for us. But first, I wanted to take a brief moment and tell you a little bit about TerraTrue. See, this week is a bit of a special week for us at TerraTrue as we mark 6 years since we got founded. And we founded TerraTrue because we wanted to bring a better way to do privacy and security into everything your teams do. So we built a unique review management platform to support all of your privacy and security needs, with a focus on three things, really. One is collaboration. So we want to make it easy to bring in the privacy champions, the security champions, and others into the development lifecycle earlier in the process so that they can collaborate better with the business, mitigate better risks, and solve them before you launch new initiatives. And then the second aspect is bringing more scale so you can keep improving your privacy by design and your security by design program, and do that without additional resources, without additional time spent, and get more coverage and visibility into what the business is doing. And then the third aspect, which is important to us, is really helping organizations do their reviews easier and better over time instead of making them more difficult as you keep doing review over review. And this is because TerraTrue gets smarter about what you've reviewed already to help you focus on what is new and unique in the features you are, or the new tools or the marketing campaigns that you're initiating. So TerraTrue becomes smarter over time and helps you focus better your time on the risks that are significant and that pose a threat to the business. When you use TerraTrue, you'll be better able to build a stronger privacy by design and security by design program, and it will achieve a number of benefits. One is the business and developers and others are able to move more quickly, innovate better, execute faster. The second, you'll be able to reduce risks of fines and risks of breaches. And third is you'll save yourself time and effort because of the intelligence that TerraTrue brings to your process. We are grateful to all of our customers who've been with us on this journey. Some of them are now in their 5th year. And we're also incredibly excited about the multitude of review functions that TerraTrue is powering for these customers today. Powering reviews in privacy legal, privacy engineering, application security, AI governance, third-party risk management, trust and safety, product counseling, and a lot more. And with that, I will hand it over to Anthony. Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks, Jad. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. As promised, we're going to take about 45 minutes to discuss trends in privacy and data security by design. I'm going to kick it off here with about 15 minutes straight of what I've been seeing in the privacy space, and then I'll hand it off to Jad, who's going to discuss what he's been seeing in security. Toward the end, we're going to try to reserve at least 10-15 minutes so we can address any questions or comments that come out throughout the discussion here. So please feel free to drop them in chat and I'll monitor it and we'll save those toward the end. With that, I guess I'm going to start with easily the biggest privacy trend of the year and likely will continue to be throughout 2025. And apologies if you're already sick about talking about it, but that would be addressing risks related to artificial intelligence. From what we've seen, a little more than half of privacy teams are now being tasked with owning AI governance, even when it's not perfectly aligned with their current mandate. And we think there are a few reasons for this. First, privacy practitioners tend to have some substantive knowledge and experience that overlaps with a lot of the challenges posed by AI. Specifically, I think that a majority of privacy professionals do realize that products marketed as AI aren't entirely new. Instead, they're more mature versions of the ML systems and recommendation engines that we've been working with and addressing risks related to for years. The biggest changes we're seeing with modern offerings is that they have more access to data, more computing power. They're being used in novel ways, and they're becoming accessible to organizations that couldn't have built their own models in the past. Because these tools aren't entirely new, we're seeing that at least to some extent, existing privacy laws are addressing risks related to AI. Specifically, I'm thinking about Article 22 of the GDPR, as well as some domestic and international laws that require, risk assessments, heightened notice, individual controls, when you're doing legally significant decisions that are made without human intervention. And given this overlap, I think many privacy professionals have felt comfortable kind of raising their hands and spearheading their internal compliance efforts. Outside of these substantive concerns, another reason we're seeing privacy take on these challenges is more procedural. Proactive privacy by design programs are well suited to identifying AI risks early in the development process. One of the biggest challenges we try to help customers with is shifting their privacy and security further left, right? Getting early insight into the development and adoption of new technologies. And as with privacy and security, we think it's best to consider AI-related risks early in the design phase of features and before you begin negotiating contracts with vendors. However, actually pulling that off, actually integrating yourself early into the process is a bit easier said than done in many cases. You need buy-in from numerous stakeholders. There's a change management process involved. And for many orgs, it's a non-starter to try to stand up an entirely new organization for this. And instead, it's much easier to leverage the goodwill you already have and sort of piggyback on your existing privacy by design or security by design process. The last reason I think we're seeing privacy teams take on AI has to do, honestly, with some clever privacy leaders using the enthusiasm for AI as an opportunity to better fund their lean privacy programs. I'll talk about this a little bit more later in the webinar, but privacy teams are under increasing pressure to demonstrate value to the business. Helping safely enable AI products or adopt AI tools can go a long way toward demonstrating that value and help secure additional funding for headcount, tools, things like that. So while it's a fact that we've seen privacy teams take on AI governance, there is some disagreement, especially in academic circles, about whether privacy law is the correct mechanism to solve the challenges of AI. At the risk of greatly oversimplifying, I've kind of seen two arguments in the space. One goes like this, basically saying, hey, look, AI tools present challenges far beyond privacy. You need to think about intellectual property, labor, employment, fraud, and depending on who you're talking to, perhaps even extinction of the human race. The other side of the argument is basically, look, AI simply exposes weaknesses in our existing privacy regulations, and that thoughtful revision of those rules could satisfy all parties involved. No matter where you sit on that spectrum, I think it's fair to say that there's broad agreement that our current privacy regulations are insufficient to completely address the challenges of AI. Some of those weaknesses, I think, will inevitably just be resolved over time. I'm thinking about accountability mechanisms, who's responsible for enforcement, what remedies are available, things like that. And some laws are already taking novel approaches. I like to look at the EU AI Act in this regard, which is really kind of grounded in products liability law and creates risk categories for different types of AI systems with related restrictions and protections, which is kind of a novel approach that we don't see that often in privacy. But until laws catch up, I think we as privacy professionals need to start getting creative in our approaches to risk mitigation. I think we need to reckon with issues like assessing whether traditional models of consent and notice and choice, which are the key to many current privacy laws, are actually adequate to deal with the challenges of AI. I think realistically, many companies are ill-equipped to explain how AI products work, especially in a consumer-friendly way that can satisfy informed consent and notice and choice requirements. I also think a lot of consumers aren't able to easily understand potential risks from AI and decide what privacy choices are right for them. And I also think we're continuing to see pushback against companies who are unilaterally changing their privacy policies to say, hey, you know what? We have the right to train our models based on data that we already have sitting on our servers. I think we also need to start thinking about how AI makes scraping and data analysis much faster, which can create entirely new risks that are ill understood by the public. A good example of this came up recently, actually. A lot of users over the past few months have tried shifting from tools like Twitter/X over to Blue Sky and Mastodon and those. And there was kind of a big backlash when they realized a lot of their Blue Sky posts were being hosted on Hugging Face and used to train AI models, complete with their usernames, the content of their posts, and everything else, because these federated systems, by their nature, make that information very easy to access and train on in a way that wasn't necessarily true in the walled garden social networks of yesteryear. Similarly, I think that the fast analysis of data means that people are finding new uses for existing data that's been sitting around for years. Think about things like CCTV footage or synonymous posts or live journals or whatever embarrassing thing you've written that could now potentially be analyzed to identify the subjects or authors quite easily in a way that maybe you could do before but wasn't practical. Um, and also, I think we need to consider the unique features of general purpose AI systems, like the fact that we don't always know how they'll be deployed, and they can be made to leak some of the training data, and how that impacts things like rights to deletion, correction, and purpose limitation. But aside from those privacy adjacent harms, I do tend to agree with the folks that say, hey, look, a multidisciplinary approach will be important going forward. Um, I think everyone here knows effective privacy teams can't work in silos, so we're already pretty well equipped to lead these multi-stakeholder efforts. But if you haven't already, 2025 is definitely going to be the year to start building relationships with folks that specialize in intellectual property and fraud and disinformation and employment and labor and all of these other topics I've been discussing for the last few minutes here. The next thing I want to discuss quickly is organizational efficiency. And I hinted at this not too long ago, but since 2022, we've seen a greater demand for efficiency in privacy programs and a nearly universal mandate to do more with less. I think this coincides with broader trends in the tech labor market, but it's no exaggeration to say that many privacy and governance functions have been hit particularly hard. Recent statistics from the IAPP's privacy governance reports tend to back this up. It showed that median privacy budgets have remained flat since 2022, despite more than 80% of these teams being given new responsibilities. And that 70% of the respondents said they don't have the privacy expertise or they have limited access to the expertise they need to meet their goals, but less than 40% of them have open headcount to help solve those problems. While I do think we'll see improvements in 2025, I'm fairly certain teams will continue to feel pressure to run lean. And we've seen that pressure manifest in two ways over the last year. The first is an increasing reliance on tools like TerraTrue to find efficiencies in their privacy review process. Some common approaches we've seen there are leveraging integration into tools like Jira and Ironclad and others to get early automated notice when things will need review. Reducing unnecessary back and forth about timelines by using centralized dashboards and self-help tools, providing faster feedback to business stakeholders using automated just-in-time recommendations, and then using tools like machine learning to automate away some rote documentation tasks so privacy teams can be more strategic and focus on higher value problems. The other way we've seen this manifest is in an increased need for privacy teams to produce metrics that demonstrate the performance and value of their program. I think the most common metrics we see are still quantitative in nature. We're talking about things like the number of privacy requests that come in, the time it takes to complete those reviews, and whether or not SLAs are being met. Which teams are most actively leveraging the privacy review function? How many deals are requiring privacy and security assessments in order to close? But we're also seeing some folks start to think about qualitative metrics. So what does customer sentiment look like? Are people more likely to buy your product because of your privacy and security practices? Are you winning more deals because of your privacy and security practices? What's your employee sentiment look like? Are their needs being met by your privacy program? Are they learning something when they interact with your privacy program? Do employees feel better about the products they're building when they consider that you have good privacy and security practices? I think across the board, the key is to identify your audience, whether that's your board, an audit committee, a product leader, employees, customers, or someone else, and figure out what questions that audience would have and which metrics can best tell your story. We've seen people try to answer things like, are we meeting our compliance obligations? How does our program compare to others in the space? And are we being more efficient over time? I see I'm getting close to my 15 minutes already. I'm going to very quickly talk through regulatory complexity and uncertainty, which especially here in the US, and this news has been changing day by day. Just last night, we learned that Andrew Ferguson is Trump's pick for the new FTC chair. And while there are many unknowns out there, I think we can make some good guesses about what to expect in 2025. I personally am skeptical that we'll see a federal privacy law in the near future, but I do think it's very possible we can see legislation related to children's privacy. But overall, 2025 will continue to be defined by the growing patchwork of state privacy laws. We've heard from some folks that this seems daunting, but the good news is states continue to copy one another's homework. And I think as long as you have a good grasp on the California law, the Virginia law, and the Connecticut law, you're in pretty good shape to build and ground your privacy program because they've really kind of centered around those few general structures. Second, I wouldn't be surprised if the FTC focuses less on privacy and what they've been calling surveillance capitalism, and instead spends some more time pursuing investigations into content moderation and fraud. And I also wouldn't be surprised to see continued antitrust enforcement, especially against large tech companies. And with the appointment of Ferguson, I think that's even more likely to happen. So with that, John, I'll pass it off to you to let us know what you've been seeing in security.
Terrific. Thank you, Anthony. So for this second half of the webinar, I'd like to talk about trends we're seeing in two related spaces within security. One is security by design, and the second is third-party risk management. So let's start first with security by design. If it were a human being, it would be about 22 years old now, probably spending a bit of its time bar hopping and dancing and enjoying. Security by design is often considered born out of Microsoft, and specifically a memo that Bill Gates sent company-wide in 2002, launching the Trustworthy Computing Initiative and iterating how important it is to build security into every facet of the software development lifecycle. So a few months before that, Microsoft had some very, very significant globally publicized security events where millions of Windows and IIS machines were compromised and spread super quickly, and it caused Microsoft an existential crisis. And this is why they decided there has to be a better way to do security, and they have to prioritize doing it in the development lifecycle across every stage. So if it's 22 years old now, why are we talking about it now? And the truth is, for a number of years now, it felt like security by design took a bit of a backseat in relation to other areas within security. And the reasons for that are numerous, but essentially organizations were spending a larger amount of time in proportion dealing with defending against ransomware, building zero trust networks and systems, improving their incident response, and yes, also managing supply chain attacks that have been continuously growing. However, this year, it really feels like security by design is making a comeback. And the reason it's doing that is sort of twofold. One, there is clearer and clearer evidence that organizations are spending more on security, and yet they're seeing more and more breaches rather than the opposite. In fact, a study from Google published just a few weeks ago surveyed organizations to understand better how they grew the number of security products they're using, which is actually a very significant growth in the past few years alone. And came back with the conclusion that organizations have more security tools, but less security. And it's a bit paradoxical, but the key takeaway from that study from Google is we don't need more security products. We need more secure products. And this comes along with a number of other releases from Google about their secure by design initiatives and how they're expanding those and thinking more deeply and more deeply ever about them. So it's also telling that this is the year where, again, Microsoft is at it. And earlier this year, Satya Nadella published another memo company-wide about its Secure Future initiative. And again, stating extremely clearly that security should be prioritized above all else, meaning above all feature development, meaning above deadlines and timelines, other initiatives. And the reason is, again, that Microsoft suffered through some very significant breaches. In fact, it was used as part of a supply chain attack that allowed nation states to access emails of very sensitive, large customers of Microsoft. And that was only one of several examples. And Microsoft decided it's time again to recommit to security by design, double down its effort, and move on that. So we know that the security approaches aren't working well today. You constantly are dealing with more breaches, spending a lot more in security. The other aspect, and a key one that tends to bring back security by design out of the woodworks, is when there is new technology that is significant, that has a number of really large risks that haven't been solved before. And in today's market, it is AI. A lot of organizations are focusing on security of AI, whether they are building large language models and training data and thinking about them, or whether they're consuming those models. And it's clearly now an area of very active research. One of the studies I read earlier this year was very telling about that. It was done by IBM. They surveyed a large number of executives and came back with this conclusion. 96% of executives out there, 96%, believe that if they were to implement AI features in their products, they're very likely to see a security breach over the next 3 years. So that gives you a sense, a little bit of development in those spaces by the edge of your seat. The good news there is a number of very well-known companies have published clear guides on how to think about those AI security risks. IBM did that, Microsoft did that, OWASP did that, and also Google did that. And in fact, Google went a step further recently with its secure AI framework. They actually published an online risk assessment that you can follow. As you're building new features in AI, you can use that risk assessment to understand better which risks apply to you and to get their perspective on controls you can build, defenses you can build, and approaches you can mitigate those risks with. What we are seeing from our customers that are using TeraTrue is that AI security is now fairly established review process. Folks know what they need to look at. It's reasonably black or white in terms of the ability to understand those risks, to know what you need to build against and defend against. And sort of they're working through that process just fine. Where we see a lot more ambiguity tends to be around AI governance. That's sort of an area that is broader. Anthony alluded to it as well. It's very multidisciplinary, and it involves not just thinking about specific security and data protection and privacy, but also considering the ethical aspects, the bias aspects, the guardrails that you need to set up against what you're releasing, making sure the experience is safe preventing sort of abuse considerations and others. And what we're seeing there is that customers, some of them have already started and established some kind of AI governance system, but others are still figuring out who should be involved in it. What sort of cadence makes sense to do there? What should be the scope of that governance? What to communicate about those AI features? What level of transparency to take, etc. So as we think about trends in security by design, I think there are a few key takeaways. One is the focus within the general security team or security budget is somewhat cyclical. And now we're seeing that security by design is making a resurgence. It's front and center again. The attitudes from Microsoft and Google to tout their security by design really tends to permeate across the industry. We expect to see more hiring. And in fact, we're starting to see that more security engineers being hired, more privacy engineers being hired with the purpose of building stronger defenses against those risks. We're likely going to see continued increases in security spending over the next few years, but with any luck, they will be more aligned with building safe foundations and more secure products. And the third key takeaway is really AI will continue to dominate that field because new applications are constantly being developed that are increasing with ever larger number of sensitive data. They want to be more connected to your day-to-day life, to more systems you're using. And as a result of that, perform larger and more sophisticated actions on your behalf. And because of that, we expect that there will be more spending and research and development of foundations in identity and verification, in trust and safety, in permissioning systems, in data protection, and anything to ensure that those applications remain safe. Now with that, we'll move to trends in third-party risk management. And again, this is a space that has seen dramatic shifts over the past decade. I mean, the equation of build versus buy is fundamentally different today than it was 10 years ago. Organizations have a much larger number of choices when it comes to buying software, as opposed to having to build it all on their own. And that's all made possible really because of advances in cloud computing that spurred this large ecosystem of software as a service or SaaS providers. So we know buying software rather than building it in-house has a number of advantages. You can be faster to market with that. You can focus better your expertise or your energy on the core strengths of your business and what makes you unique and powerful. But at the same time, buying software also introduces risks that weren't present before, especially now. Not only are third parties, you're sharing more sensitive data with those third parties, but also you're giving them more sensitive access to your own systems. And for example, you're giving them more and more access to customer databases, source code, back office systems, productivity tools. And as a result of that, the risk that something happens to that vendor and causes you security nightmares is increasing. And so it basically begs the question, what are companies doing today to protect themselves from these risks? I can tell you one thing they're not doing, which is pen testing. When I started at Google almost 20 years ago, we were pen testing pretty much every third party that we were using, whether it's a very large organization, down to even your local dry cleaning service. And those pen testing efforts are monstrous, right? It takes a long time to set up an engagement. It takes a long time to conduct the engagement. And then you have to work with the vendor for months or even sometimes a year for them to fix all of their security issues. We know with confidence this isn't anymore the norm today. Barring from really exceptional cases, organizations are not pen testing their vendors. And for that, I can give you one data point. Us at TheraTrue, we have reasonably sensitive access to customer systems if they choose to do so. We're a small company by company standards, and all of our customers nearly have the right to conduct pen testing against us, but not a single one has ever asked us for a pen test since we were founded. So how is the market really responding to those third-party risks? It comes down to three things: technical, legal, and process. On the technical front, organizations are building more and more monitoring of their third parties, preferably real-time monitoring, so that they can quickly sense when something is abnormal and potentially consider severing the link while those abnormalities are investigated. And in fact, we saw it in the case of a breach of Okta. One of their largest customers detected that through their own monitoring and reported it to Okta before Okta even knew about it. And that's a system put in place so you don't have to wait until your vendor tells you that something went wrong. On the legal front, what we're seeing is now it's standard practice to introduce security clauses into all your contracts, and demand from your third parties to have all the right controls for security around confidentiality, integrity, availability, breach notification, joint incident response, etc. We are a consortium called the Minimum Viable Secure Product, was started by Salesforce and Google. We're actually part of it. And so if you're looking for standard security clauses, they have them out of the box that you can use directly into your contracts. So now we go to the process front, and what we're seeing there is even the smallest of companies are now establishing a thorough process to vet all of their third parties. They do that typically before the relationship with the vendor is started. And the way they vet today is through analyzing SOC 2 reports, InfoSec policies and others. They're not doing pen testing, but they're analyzing documentation from the vendor. And we're seeing increasingly those companies spending more time prioritizing their third parties, categorizing them according to risk buckets, how much access they have to data, how much access they have to systems, and spending more time conducting due diligence on those that have higher risk. But this is also where AI is really spurring a shift in process. Up to very recently, we were always seeing customers reach out to us through spreadsheets that they manually send to track a vendor's due diligence and to get answers to them. And more, we're seeing a shift to actual providers. And the reason is in part because of Gen AI, which makes the process of reading through a ton of documentation and responding to it much faster. SOC 2 reports can be analyzed very quickly. You get the right AI insights automatically. You focus on that. You don't have to read a 300-page report. And the same applies to many other documentation. So we are actually seeing more and more customers switch to a fully fledged solution as opposed to doing things manually because they save a lot of time. The other sort of impetus to doing this through providers, and by the way, we are also a provider of third-party risk management. We wanted it as an add-on initially, but now we're seeing it's become so popular that it's selling on its own on a standalone basis. And the reason is also organizations are thinking more and more about doing these reassessments on a regular basis. And they do that for two reasons. One, make sure that from year to year, the posture of privacy and security of that third party hasn't changed. They weren't breached. They didn't suffer damaging press. They're still able to give you the confidence and trust that you need from them. But the second is because uses of those vendors are evolving over time. You start with a small use case, then you grow it, you build more integrations with those vendors, and as a result of that, your risk profile is changing drastically. So these reassessments help the organization refocus on what's important, understand risk, mitigate those risks, and build stronger defenses for that. And so when it comes to takeaways really in third-party risk management, I think for me, it comes down to a few things. Spend time reviewing all of your vendors, focus on the ones that you think bring you the most risk. Switch to a provider for third-party risk management if you can. It saves you a lot of time. It gives you more visibility. It automates your process. It just gives you a better assessment of risks that are being introduced. But also more importantly, which not a lot of folks tend to think about, when dedicate some time not only to assess the vendor, but also to assess how you're implementing your integrations with that vendor, because that's an area you can control, and you can significantly change how much exposure you get from a breach of a third party if you minimize the data you're sharing with them, you minimize the level of access they have to your systems, you build better monitoring. So do take time when available to tighten your implementation with the vendor. That gives you, in the long run, a lot more leverage than anything else you can do in that space. And with that, I'm going to stop here, say thank you to all of you who have joined us, and to say we welcome your questions. And Anthony, maybe we'll put that slide with our email addresses.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you everyone for joining today. I put up a slide with our contact information. We saw a couple of questions come in early, but I think we actually already answered them in our remarks. So unless any other last minute ones come in now, thank you for joining us today. We'll give you roughly 5 minutes back, but feel free, of course, to reach out to us at the email addresses on screen and we'll be happy to chat.
Fantastic. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.